Qodo.ai/get started. You can go there. It'll take you to a place where you can go and like download the IDE extension, which we'll be talking about heavily today, and be able to get started with that. So in any case, let's go ahead and talk a bit about what it is that we're up to at
Hey,
Qodo.
Jonathan, can I interrupt you real
Oh
quick?
yeah, go for it.
To get a little bit of participation from everyone, you can raise your hand on this. So the first thing I would like to do, if you don't mind, Jonathan, how
Sure.
many people use VS Code? Please raise your hand.
Can they raise their hands? Are they
Yep.
allowed to raise their hands? Oh,
Yep.
they can raise their hands.
And this is just a VS Code versus IntelliJ thing.
Ooh,
So
this might be a good religious war because like half the audience raised their hands right there.
I
Like
figured it's a year. Let's have a
so
religious war.
everyone put their hands down, and then how many of you are like VS Code or not VS Code, but like a JetBrains user? Ooh, so about half of the VS Code, half as many as the VS Code people. So, like, I'm looking at this now, I'm thinking the rest of you are what? Vim? Emacs? No, no, we probably have. If we got any .NET developers in the audience, they might be using like Visual Studio. Maybe some Xcode people slip in there. In any case, we'll have to save that religious war for another day. But the reason he asks is one of the primary products we're going to be talking about today is called Qodo Gen. Qodo Gen, today the IDEs we're supporting, so hopefully we don't get some hate from some of you on this. The IDEs we are supporting are VS Code and the JetBrains IDEs. If you are not included in this list, you are still welcome to use our product and try it out with one of the supported IDEs. But nonetheless, the support for your respective IDE might be on the horizon. I know that like Visual Studio is probably one of the next most popular ones that we see. But in any case, if there's something that we don't support that you need us to support, feel free to reach out to us after the meeting and we can talk a bit more about that. Um, the other thing, though, that's worth noting is beyond Qodo Gen, which is this is going to be your IDE extension. This is going to be a major focus of the demo today. The other big thing we're going to be focusing on is Qodo Merge. This is actually a code reviewing tool. So if you guys have played around with tools in the AI space before, you're probably familiar with a lot of IDE extensions. There's a whole bunch of them out there nowadays. What we're doing is we're building a platform that extends across the SDLC. Qodo Merge is going to be another big component today, where we're going to show you how Qodo Merge is used to help make your code reviews a lot more effective. There's not an icon here for Azure DevOps, but we do support GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and Azure DevOps, which should cover 95% of the people out there. Maybe some of you are in Perforce, I don't know. But the idea is that those are the primary things we're going to be covering. We're not today going to be talking about Qodo Cover, which is right now in tech preview, which you guys, if you want to go to our website, go to our open source repo, you guys can play with that. Basically, that scans repos to increase code coverage. It generates the test to improve code coverage. And then two other products that will be on the horizon later this year, Qodo UX and Qodo Spec. In particular, I think when I talk to a lot of people, they're really excited about getting better specs because one of the big development issues that we see out there, and when we're thinking about the SDLC in its entirety, is if people aren't getting good requirements, sadly, they don't result in actually delivering features and functions that they're supposed to. So.
Well, and I would, Jonathan, though I'm the advocate and not into sales, but I've been using this, and actually on my prior company and stuff, we have this implemented in initial in Qodo Merge. You can see a little bit of this preview of what Qodo Spec is because we have an integration into Jira, and I think it's GitHub tasks.
GitHub issues.
Yeah. So it will actually do that already. Qodo Merge actually uses some remnants. This is that whole iterative process in our development, that why I'm very enthusiastic and love our engineering team, is that they're doing these small iterative and building it up as they go, kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we get into talking about Qodo Merge today, you guys will start to get an early taste of kind of what we're up to. And this does begin with integrating with other tools like Jira to be able to do these things effectively. So that said, I just want to highlight for you guys, if there's any takeaway, if any of you are going to like tune out in the next 5 minutes and forget us for the rest of the webinar, I just want to highlight to you some of the core use cases that people are oftentimes coming to us for. You can look at those purple headers there, kind of take mental note of them. These aren't all of the use cases. We could be used things for things like like bug fixing. Refactoring is listed here. Code maintenance is listed here. We do code reviews, test creation. But like the idea is that like this is probably the most prominent things that we see the most, and things that hopefully by the end of today we will have shown you how we help people to accomplish each of these in kind of a pseudo real world type of scenario. So anyway, grab your screenshot of this, take your mental notes. Hopefully by the end, each of you are going to have at least one use case that's meaningful to you that you can take away from this to use our products with. So let me go ahead and switch screens here. I am today
Hey,
going
real
to make,
quick, before we
oh yeah,
jump, since Anon just asked a question, it says, in which platform the Qodo is supported? So it depends on, because we integrate into different platforms, I would say. So if it's Qodo merge, we have different ones right here. You can see like Bitbucket and all that, and Cover is in Jenkins and your CI/CD pipelines. You have Qodo Gen in the two IDEs right there. And then spec that's coming, there's a preview of it a little bit kind of in there with the Jira and Qodo. Does that answer your question, I hope, Anon?
yeah. So those are the primary technologies. The other thing I might add into that, language support. Language support is pretty diverse. I'm yet to encounter someone who's using a language that we do not support. Most of us are doing Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Go, Ruby, PHP. I mean, you guys all know the popular languages out there. I haven't encountered one that we don't support yet. So like, I think you're all in pretty good shape. Um,
And
let's
if
go
there's
ahead.
a limited, and I'm sorry, I also want to add this. Remember, we have the ask too. What's the beauty of this is you can get down to the raw, not 100% of just a prompt, but you can get down to a raw. So you could actually, if you wanted to, which I've done this before, grab a COBOL file, and if you wanted to ask a question about the COBOL file, you can. It's not 100% supported or other, but you will get answers back from it.
So we send our condolences to any of you who are working with COBOL. All
Yeah.
right. So today, now that you've all told me that you're using VS Code, I'm going to use PyCharm. I, sorry. I mean, last month we did VS Code. I'm trying to be like, we've got this whole like diversity and inclusion type of thing out there nowadays, and I'm trying to be diverse and inclusive. And so last month was VS Code, this month PyCharm. But the reality is that with what you're going to see today works exactly the same way in VS Code. There's not going to be any sort of like major difference or anything like that. So you're going to feel very comfortable in both cases. Um, so today, the project I happen to be using, last month, I actually used a similar project. It's called Screenshot to Code. And the idea is it's got a TypeScript front end, it's got a Python back end. And the idea behind the project is you upload an image to it, it converts that image into actual usable code. Like, so you take a screenshot of like a web interface and it'll turn that into code for you or whatnot. Last month we talked a bit more about front end development and using the TypeScript side of things. This month we're going to talk about more of the back end. We're going to be using Python as the example. Again, language support is pretty diverse out there. The reality is this is not your code. You're not going to know everything about it and understand exactly everything that's going on. The expectation here is that you're going to come out of this meeting seeing what it can do, and then you're going to want to see how it works on your code. And so just kind of keeping that in mind. Now, one of the things I'm going to jump it right into, kind of get right into the meat of things here. There's a lot of different tools you guys have seen out there. Some of you use like Chat GPT or Claude or other ways of kind of generating code or using it to kind of help solve coding challenges. I'm going to start to show you right out of the gate how Qodo can be used to do much more complex types of tasks beyond what you would be able to easily do in through of a chat prompt. And an example of this, I'm actually going to close out my file structure here for a moment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go right to the top of a function right here. I've got this extract params function. It's like a like 60ish lines of code, probably needs to be refactored down a bit, but I know for sure that we do not have tests for this code. And so what I want to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to click test this function. And this is actually kind of a marquee feature. Like when people think about Qodo, one of the first things that comes to mind is our advanced test generation capabilities. And that was actually one of the use cases that was shared in that slide I posted up earlier. Now, what this is doing is it's showing that is generating tests is a multi-step process. This is not just like you can go to a prompt. Maybe some of you have done this. You go to into a chat prompt. Maybe I'll even pull up the Qodo chat for a moment, and I'll be like, I'll select the extract params function and I'll be like, give me tests for this code, right? And what happens? Some of you right now on mute are predicting like, yeah, it's gonna like throw a whole bunch of tests at you. And maybe those tests are good, maybe they're bad, but it doesn't matter. The reality is it gives me a bunch of tests, but doesn't give me any closure, right? I don't know, like, is that enough tests? Are there important edge cases or behaviors that are being properly accounted for here? I don't get any of that closure. So the reason we built out this sort of methodology for generating tests is because if we click on show more here on the right side, scroll through here, the very first step of generating tests is to analyze the code and understand what are the behaviors that we need to generate tests for, right? Like for example, for a happy path test, your classic sort of scenario, the user submitted the exact params in the correct way, in the most unicorns and rainbowsy type of way, and everything worked exactly as you intended it to, right? That's your ideal top of the line happy path tests. Then we have other happy path tests here as well, and then we move into edge cases where we start to cover sorts of scenarios, error cases, error handling, and so forth. And one of the things that we were actually just out at AWS reInvent last month, and one of the things I heard a lot when we showed this was that engineers were like, this is so helpful because a lot of times it's showing me sorts of edge cases that I hadn't considered. Right? It's pointing out things, it's educating me as an engineer on things that maybe could or should be doing as types of behaviors to generate tests for. And I saw you come off mute, David.
Yeah, because I wanted to jump in here real quick and say, this is quite, I mean, it's over a year because I actually picked this tool because of this feature in the first place. And I know it sounds sales, but the go into this is if you think of it as a developer. So I'm your advocate of this. This is your kind of pair programmer. And this is one of the first things we started doing is COT. If anyone knows chain of thought. So this is before chain of thought even was a term. We were doing this where if you see this, it's doing multi-stepped. So it's asking different models in different ways based on what you're looking at to come up with these. It's not just one prompt. So that's that whole thing. It's getting like a more descriptive and understanding of the code and then coming up with these kind of things. Does that make sense? I think it's remarkable. Like a lot of people, we're in this, our engineers and stuff are really staying on the forefront and really on the cutting edge of all this AI technology.
Yeah, and you guys, if you guys come around for the webinar next month, I'm pretty confident we'll have an even updated test generation flow where we're adding in additional pieces that will excite you guys. We're adding in more advanced functionality around generating mocks and things like that. So in any case, stay tuned for that. But today, one of the things I would also highlight as a last part of behaviors is that under each one of these main behaviors, you also get sub behaviors where you can get more granular types of sub behaviors. Now, as you go through this list, if you like something, you simply click on generate test, generate test, generate test. Those tests, as we speak, are being generated and populated down here below. And then from there, all I need to do is either copy these tests to my clipboard or open up it as a file, and I'm off to the races. It's really kind of that straightforward and easy to be able to do. There are a couple of other things, though, that are worth noting. One is if I encounter a behavior that for some reason, that is not listed here and I want to add it in, all you need to do is come in here and type in add behavior and then click add and generate, and it will generate a test for that. The other thing that I would note, and this will actually kind of take us over into the configuration for a moment, is if you're looking at a test and you're thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't quite meet my needs, right? It could be a wide variety of scenarios. Like maybe it's not using the structure we typically do for test generation, or maybe as an example of this, in the I was working with a customer. They were actually using this to generate not just unit tests but integration tests, and they were saying to themselves like, well, when you're generating integration tests, it's not actually showing like the special API endpoint that we use. This is where the configuration can come in to increase the acceptance rates of your tests. So first, if I click and expand this out here, and maybe this is a bad example, but like what you can do is you can actually paste in example tests of what you would want to see as kind of the pinnacle or gold example of a good test. Like maybe it's a test you created or someone created and you thought these are great. You can even include multiple tests if you wanted to. We take that not just to make sure that we're generating the types of tests you're looking for, but to follow the formatting, the structure, the commenting, any of that sort of stuff that you typically would expect or want to see. We can use that as context. Additionally, you have the ability to add in any other instructions that you would want. In fact, right here, use an arrange, act, assert style, arrange, act, assert style of testing. You'll notice that when it generated tests for me, it actually not only did that, it even took the initiative to add in some comments to indicate that, hey, here's kind of the different phases or stages of the test. And so anyway, the last part that I'll
Okay,
note and then I'll
I got one
pause.
thing real quick. Can you
Yeah,
go on there, Jonathan? So can you click on the test frameworks?
absolutely.
So what I wanted to show, because someone asked this question, and so and I did answer it, but I wanted to get a little bit more in depth of, depending on the language you're using, this panel will and will not have frameworks to use to test. So it's not all, when we say we have limited support of some things, we're referring to this panel where that there's only a certain amount of frameworks that this will support, like in the Java, JavaScript world, and the Python, and I can't remember other ones. I think maybe
Yeah.
Kotlin and a couple other languages that have their frameworks to be tested. Doesn't mean you can't use the other panel, like the Gen Chat. But the way to tell that out is not looking here, because this is only telling you to test frameworks because you're in Python world. If you had a Java file open, you would see like testng and JUnit. So don't take this as, oh, it only does Python. We do other ones too.
Yeah, I might add to that like for example, we've explicitly listed out testing frameworks for most of the popular languages out there. One, for example, it's pretty popular that I don't think we've done this for yet would be like PHP. You won't see a testing framework drop down box for PHP. However, if you're using like a popular testing framework like pest PHP or something like that, all you need to do is include that in the instructions, right? Just add that in there. Say like do generate tests using the PHP pest PHP framework, and it will include that same thing. Like, by the way, if for some reason the framework you want to use is not listed here in a drop down, same sort of thing. But most of the cases you're pretty covered in my opinion and in my experience. So I think you should be in good shape.
And next month there'll even be more if they use the new feature that's supposedly, like you just announced, kind of, that should be
Oh
coming.
yeah, yeah. In any case, that's testing. And hopefully that's helpful. And hopefully you guys can see like how this is so much more sophisticated and advanced than most of the other testing methodologies out there. It's more thorough in its approach. The other thing that I will just note as a final note on this is that these configuration options can be saved into a configuration file. In fact, if I go in and take a look at my like backend directory here, there is a toml file here that I can create, and that actually can be included in my repo. And in fact, if I close out this so we can free up some room, you'll see that like configuration details on whether I want to use mocks and what framework and other instructions. I can have this all saved in here, not only just for my own selfish purposes, but also like if I have other colleagues who work on this project with me, which is oftentimes the case, I can include this in there so that now when they go to generate tests and they have the repo cloned locally, it'll detect that configuration file and automatically use that as the configuration for the generation of tests. So hopefully that helps you guys out.
One thing, can you, I know you know this because you're the one that first did, because we had a discussion on this.
Hmm.
Oh, if you have another file, you can have other context. Say you're doing a test and you're like, I have a base test that's not this file that you're trying to test, but you want the test to extend it. So you need to put that in the context. And you can do
Ooh.
that from Qodo Gen chat.
Let's talk about, by the way, guys, this is going to be a principle that exists across our platform. This is not just about generating tests with additional context. In fact, let me go ahead and pull this up for you guys and talk about it. So when you saw me earlier, I just did the easy option. I just clicked test this function. Off to the races. Wonderful. Great. However, if you want to do something a little bit more customized, you can do this, execute the same thing from the chat panel on the left side here. In fact, if I hit the slash key, you're going to notice there's a variety of pre-baked functionality in here. We're not going to talk about all of these today, but like we just effectively did the test suite functionality by clicking that test this function button. I'm going to do the same thing now. However, before I submit that, if there's any other context that would be important for the generation of tests, I can come in here and hit the @ symbol, and this allows me to add other files or folders to be used. So I could, like, for example, by default it has like full project listed here. I could index that locally. But in this case, because I'm trying to generate tests, maybe I do a search for tests, and maybe there's a test file out there that already exists. Or maybe I want to go ahead and use like my backend directory where all the Python stuff is, and I want to add that as context. Context is really important. It's, again, not just about tests. It's about if I want to ask questions of my code, or if I want to ask it to generate code for me and have it be aware of my entire project, for example, this is really kind of going to be critical in making sure that it has that sort of level of awareness and that it's not just looking at this one file in a vacuum. The other thing that I would note too, if I was to go ahead and redo what I did a moment ago and not just add extra context, you'll also notice down here, you have the ability to be able to select additional models. In fact, we are frequently adding in additional models. And so, like, for example, right now you'll see GPT-4o. That's the one that's defaulted to. You'll notice GPT-o1 is in there, Claude is in there, Gemini is in there. If I was to give you guys any guidance on this, I would just say click on Claude 3.5 and don't look back. It's literally the best right now when it comes to two things. One is context. In other words, how much information can it take in and output as part of a transaction? It has about 33% more tokens available than what the max is on like the GPT models. But more importantly, Claude does a fantastic job with coding benchmarks. In fact, if you look at like coding task benchmarks out there, Claude 3.5 generally does the best. One exception might be if you look at GPT-o1. GPT-o1 is like, actually, we put in percent parentheses there, slower for a reason. It is much slower, but it is much more in depth and complex in its level of thinking. So you kind of like increase your thinking and reasoning, but with at the decrease of speed. I think all around Claude is going to be your best bet in those cases. And we do have a blog post out there on the different models if you are interested in diving in a little bit deeper into which models would be better for different scenarios. Claude 3.5 is going to be your general purpose one.
And I have someone anonymous, whoever the anonymous thing is, and you do not bring your own Anthropic API. That is part of our code. So if you're using a paid version of this, you get that. I don't know that
So
we have the all the models for the free version, but the paid, if you're paying for it, you do get to use those.
yeah, so we provide all the API access. There's no limit for you guys either. So you guys will go ahead and get on a trial, you purchase a license, you can use any or all of those models to your heart's content. Like you don't have to, you don't put in your own API keys or anything like that. I will add, however, We do have many large enterprise clients, Fortune 100 companies who are using our products. And in some of those cases, they want to route the API calls to these AI vendors through their own Azure OpenAI service or their own AWS Bedrock service. In those situations, with an enterprise license, we can be able to do that. It's not something we do in a standard multi-tenant setup. So like we'd have to spin up a special single tenant instance of the product or a self-hosted instance of the product to be able to allow you to do that. So just hopefully that's a thorough enough answer for you.
Yeah, and can I add now, when you're talking about the models real quick, Jonathan,
Hmm.
um, the one thing I would say is, you know how like you were saying use Claude? Once you get the Claude answer like you did there, what I like to do is I tell people, especially when like one of my talks on how to use this, is use this to your advantage. When you have a chat, we have this context. So not only the files and everything, but your prior chats. So you can actually pick a different model now after you got your answer, and you can say, tell me how good is the prior answer. And you can have another model grade the other model's response, and or give it other prompts too. Say, tell me if this is good enough to use, or give me an alternative. And so now you have, even like you're putting them against each other. So if you're newer to this and you want to learn, you're just a new developer too, this is a really good tool. Or even a senior guy and say, I just want a secondary opinion, you can do that.
True, true. Very good point. So let's talk about then some of the other functions that you can do. There are some basic things I'm going to cover for just a moment. Some other tools that you guys might be using can do these sorts of things. So for example, like I am brand new to this project. I'm not familiar with what this is doing or how it works. Maybe it's even a coding language that I'm just not as fluent in. I can easily come in here and I'm going to go ahead and like run the explain command. In fact, I'm going to switch my model. I didn't actually do that, guys. I didn't follow my own advice. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and run like the slash explain command, and that will actually give me a nice breakdown of kind of what this particular function does. One of the things that I'll note as that gets generated is right here. You'll notice, in fact, that we have two different things. We have context and we have focus. Right here, this generate code.py is the focus. It's the file. And within that file, I can either do the entire file as the focus, or, and as you've seen me doing, I can actually narrow that focus to specific components, functions, classes, and so forth. So just kind of highlighting that for you, that can be a very useful thing to kind of expand or contract the focus depending on what you want. And then that additional context can also be useful when you want to be able to, when you want to basically add in other files or folders that you think would be relevant to giving you an effective response. So in this case right here, though, you'll observe that like we start off with kind of a summary of what this code does, an example of how it would be used, and then kind of give you a breakdown, starting with the inputs, the flow of the code, and then finally the outputs of that code to kind of give you a complete breakdown of how that would all operate. The other thing that I will note here is that while we do have a variety of slash commands, I think docstring is a very popular one. In fact, if I think about the things that engineers probably like the least doing, but are important, I would think like documentation is up there. Generating tests is up there. We'll be talking about code reviews in a moment. We're really trying to tackle these areas that really none of us really find a lot very fulfilling, but that need to get done. And so the last thing I'm going to note here, I think that would be also important. Maybe not the last. There's actually a couple of other things I think that will be important to talk about. But like one of the things that this we start to bleed into a little bit is the idea of code reviews. We have a product I'm going to be talking about in a moment that does code reviews, but I want to highlight how we can actually give you code review functionality right within the IDE. So before you create your PR, your MR, your whatever, the idea is like I can run the improve command against my code. In fact, let me go ahead and like just select the entire file for fun right now. And I'm going to go ahead and run that. And what this is going to do is analyze this file to point out to me ways that this could be better. Now, this could be like really super important stuff like security and performance, but it could also be more mundane stuff like maybe better error logging or error handling or other things like that. So let's take a look at what it gives us. So one of the things you'll observe is for each of the suggestions it gives, it says it gives me kind of tags or labels. So this is about performance. This is about type safety. This is a security one and performance. It's the double whammy. And then also an error handling one here, code clarity and maintainability. You get the idea. But let's take a look at one of these. In fact, let's talk about the security one. Add rate limiting middleware to the generate code WebSocket endpoint to prevent abuse and ensure fair resource usage. That's not a bad idea, right? Depending on how this application's being implemented or deployed, I can click on show details. It gives me says, hey, without rate limiting, the WebSocket endpoint is vulnerable to abuse through excessive requests, blah, blah, blah. And then if I like this idea or I want to explore it a little bit deeper, I can actually click on preview code to actually show me what the diff would look like, how it would actually change my code to make that better. Then finally, if I like these suggestions, I can check boxes next to each of these that I like, and I can click prepare code changes, and that will take all the changes I've selected and create a master diff that I can then apply to my code. I can actually review that before applying to my code. And so that's the improve functionality. And again, that's going to be a segue here to, I think, to code reviews. But I want to pause there to see if there's any questions or any other thoughts that you might have, David.
Nothing right now. I was answering someone else's question right now, but yeah.
No worries. But by the way, any questions that you thought were good that the broader audience should be aware of? Because I think that sometimes there's good questions asked that maybe everybody should get the answer to.
Well, I think this is one because I can't KC, I think it is KC is now asked too. It says I'm only asking this because I've switched to Copilot since they have released a Copilot as a free service.
Mm,
I would say we have a free service still, and he was saying only in VS Code, and I would say, hey, look, you can use this actually in your JetBrains IDE too. And I'm pretty sure with the Visual Studio, when we come out with the Visual Studio, we always have a free tier too of
true.
that. So and and he was asking too, like, well, how does it compare against these and doing that? And I would say, I mean, the landscape is ever changing all the time. So I would say that I think we tend to pride ourselves on not just doing some code generation and checkboxing, saying some tests or doing something like that. It's more this platform and this comprehensive, getting quality code out there faster for you and helping enhance you, but also making sure it's code and the integrity of that code. So
Absolutely. The other thing that I would highlight, I was working with some customers recently, and I said like, why wouldn't you guys just like use the free Copilot, right? Like, it's free now. Like, it sounds like, in fact, I think code generation to a large degree is becoming a bit of a commodity, to be honest with you guys. It's not really anything fancy anymore. I think that's why we're starting to do things like the code reviews and why we're doing like test generation. To stay relevant nowadays as a product, you have to be able to do much more than code generation. And one of the things that they called out though was, especially if you're trying to use this for like work purposes, is that the free one, the license, it basically allows them to be able to train models and so forth on your code, which is the case with a lot of free tier products nowadays, including our own. And so if you want to avoid a vendor being able to actually like train models on code and stuff that's submitted through the product, you will want to pay for a product regardless. However, if you're doing this for personal purposes, you're in college, you're working on hobby projects, I would definitely use one of the free products out there. That's probably a great way to do it. So there's a huge amount of questions that just came through from one person. One of the highlights though that I'd like to tackle here, and I almost wonder if we have the time to tackle it or if we can just tackle it verbally, would be like the test driven development question. about can this be used for test-driven development? I know, David, you have a video out there that on our on the YouTube channel that we could maybe share with them. But like, could we like verbally talk about basically what that's like?
Yeah, I mean, on the other one, I mean, it depends on how purist you want to go for test-driven development. So I'm one of the purists, but I know, like, speaking to it like purist wise, there is a little change. Like, you don't write the test without even having a class or the method yet or the function. But if you go to the test panel, the one thing I wanted to show is go into where you say, hey, generate a test. If you wanted to, if you clicked on the Qodo Gen panel over on the right.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And
Okay. Yeah, you have to actually get invoked. This is the one thing. So there's a couple of them. If you just create a method or a function that's empty, so that's the first step that you're going to want to do. So you're going to want to say, hey, here is at least the structure of it. That's the one thing the purists say, hey, the first thing you want to do is write a test and it fails because there's no method. I could never wrap my mind around that all the time, but you can do that and I understand. But the next thing after that is it's automatically going to try to come up with some suggestions for you. And what I like about this is the test-driven development, the community or whatever might say, well, look, it's already creating these tests. How do you even know what the functionality is? Well, it's trying to guess and understand what you're trying to even do by just the name of the function. So this is kind of, you don't have to take it. So you could actually change your context to 0. Say, I don't want any tests. I just want these behaviors. And I might or might not use them based on just the empty function call or the empty function that I have of the test the unit of work I want to do. So you won't, where it says go to test, you wouldn't have any because you put like a 0. But if you go all the way down to, this is the feature that I really like about this is nope, go up. I thought it should have, oh yeah, add a behavior. So if you think about this, that's the test-driven methodology. So you're like, hey, I have this function and I have not done anything in it yet. It takes in an integer. And you might have put Fibonacci on there. And so you got all these different kind of tests because it said Fibonacci in the name. I'm assuming you probably want to do the Fibonacci in this method, but it might be all the way wrong or whatever. Or you could say, look, the Fibonacci, I want it to only do up to 10 for the numbers and nothing more. And so where you would have the regular Fibonacci kind of test saying, hey, it should be able to use all these numbers, you can actually give it what you're expecting it or wanting it to do, and it'll write a test that's going to assert that for you. And there's your TD, to me, that's where your TDD is. Now, we can have a talk over beers or something on, is that really TDD? But I think that's kind of the gist of where you want to get, to. You write your test first, and that's what we're doing. So if you just created a function in there maybe and just say, add, addition or something, like just a definition in your code base, in your generate code or whatever.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So I think that one of the things that so basically what you're saying though is that like you would create a skeleton of a function which basically has nothing inside of it. It's empty. You would then use this. It would try to anticipate behaviors that you'd be looking to generate tests for. And if you like those, you generate tests for them. And then if there's anything that are missing, you would add behaviors and it would generate tests for those. And then once you have the tests generated, you would then be able to I think this is what you have in the video is like once you have those tests generated, you would then create them in a file and you would then add them as context. You would go ahead and add in the file. You would say let's pretend for a moment here you go and find the test file you created,
Yep.
and you would add it as context, and then you would say like generate or complete this function based on the test file, right?
Exactly. And the key to this too, it's like 100%. So now you're getting this initial code base too that is driven by that test, and you get the response there, and you can look at it and say, oh, it's pretty good, or you can change some things up. But as long as you're happy with your tests, and they're passing, you can keep on iterating over that and fine tune it. And the other thing is, and I love how you said ja because my wife is Latin, so I love the laughing of the ja. Thank you so much. That even makes it even better. So and she's from Venezuela, so ja I think is a Venezuelan thing, but maybe not. So the last thing is also on this note, Jonathan, is after you have that and you do those test cases, another thing is if you put requirements like in a Java doc or in a comment section above the method and you copy it or you put that into context, it will actually, the model sees that and will take that as some instructions too. So that'll even give it even more hints of, hey, this is really what I want to do before you write any code into the method.
Absolutely. So hopefully that was helpful to you guys. For any of you who are doing test-driven development, I'm going to bring up in a moment actually how to find the YouTube video as well when I switch back over to my browser for the Qodo
I'll
merge
put the
demo.
I'll get it. I'll put
Yeah,
the
yeah. So I think that the other thing I would just highlight, because there's a question here about like, is there a way to run explain across over a workspace or a project? The short answer is yes. And in fact, this might tie into another question around context, but like, for example, I'm going to go ahead and clear out all context. I have nothing selected. I'm simply going to come in here and I'm going to add in the folder, the full project in this case, or maybe a subdirectory. And from there, this now has become my personal chat GPT, right? What do I want to know about this project? How is authentication implemented in this project? If I can even type today. Um, and so like I can go ahead and ask a question like, how would I do this? Or here's another one. I'm not gonna actually demo this per se because this is already generating now. But like I have a stack trace over here, for example, or an error message, and I'm trying to debug and figure out what's going on here. I have the entire project selected as context. I can actually like dump this error message into chat and say, where is this issue coming from, right? Again, when I way back, I wasn't lying to you when I said that context is so important when it comes to using any sort of AI solution nowadays. And your ability to come in here and add in whatever context is necessary is going to help you to accomplish those sorts of things. So, and there is one other question though. Like someone said they were using like a really large project and they were wondering like how would would Qodo actually be able to handle that? There are some settings that you can do to adjust like how big of a context it can take. And I think right now by default it's like a thousand file maximum or something like that. But like if you wanted to increase that further, you probably could. It would just slow down the responses as you would expect, right? It's trying to do a lot of work. Expect that if you're using a huge context, it's going to be a little bit slower on the response, maybe a lot a bit slower, but you're going to get something much faster than if you were trying to do it by hand. So in any case, so that's the other thing I would just note there. So the other thing then we're gonna do is we've down to the last 15 minutes. I do want to flip over and talk about Codo merge for a little bit. If there's other questions around the IDE extension, I hope that guys have gotten most of what you need. Again, I think that a huge part of this will giving you enough so that you can go and try this on your own code and be able to validate how this works. I am continuing to get questions about like how we compete with certain other vendors. Is that we compete really in a few different ways. One, of course, is the platform approach. We're going to be talking about Codo merge, code reviews. A lot of these other vendors, they're not doing code reviews. And in fact, what you're going to see is going to be something that's pretty novel to many of you. You've probably not seen anything like it. And we already have those other products we talked about at the beginning that are also on the near horizon that we're going to be releasing. Test generation, our test generation functionality we showed at the very beginning, nothing compares to that. Some of the other things that might that might be a differentiator to some of the vendors you're working with, we can actually do complete code base indexing of like GitHub or other things like that so that you can actually select repos as context within your IDE, not just local files, but actually remote files that are on your Git repos. There's lots of things that are out there that we could do to kind of make that better. So in any case, and then the other thing that really stands out is for a lot of people who are very security sensitive, our flexibility in deployment, being able to do self-hosted, single tenant, allowing you to use your own AI models. There's a lot of flexibility we can do there at the enterprise level to be able to meet your security stance and so forth. So those are some other things that kind of stand out to me immediately. I just wanted to highlight real quick, if you go to our YouTube channel, I think David posted the link in chat to everybody as well. But if you go to our YouTube channel and search for TDD, you're going to see the test-driven development video here. It's about 5 minutes long. I'm going to be honest, David. I usually skip the first 90 seconds. If you skip the first 90 seconds, it's only 3.5 minutes and it gets right into doing the thing in the IDE. Just a pro tip for you guys, if you want to get right to it, because some of you are millennials and you don't like fluff. You want to kind of like get right into the point before you lose your attention span. So in any case, let's go ahead and actually flip over to talking about Qodo merge for a second. So this is actually, by the way, this is a real PR, by the way. I'm using an example. It's ironically, it's actually a PR for the product that we're talking about. And so what this is doing is this is going to work. You're going to create PRs the same exact way that you always have, whether it's Bitbucket, GitLab, GitHub, Azure DevOps. That's not going to change. What happens though is after you've posted your PR, within like 30 to 60 seconds, we will post additional comments to the PR to help both you as the PR author, as well as the code reviewer, to be able to navigate it more quickly and to catch things that you might have overlooked. So let's take a look at some of these things. So in this case, the user posted the description. In this case, a lot of times the description is just kind of, why does this PR exist? Sometimes it's just a link to a ticket. It can be whatever. But then we scroll in, and this is where we've actually added in some appendages to that initial comment. So we think about it as like peeling back layers of an onion. You start at the surface layer. The surface layer is, this is a bug fix. Great. As a code reviewer, you're trying to kind of get into this and trying to like really kind of digest what this is about. So it's a bug fix. Great. Now, this particular PR, if I take a look at it, this actually is 7 different commits, right? What we've taken is all of the changes.
Jonathan, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, go for it. Always.
One thing, the user description, it used to be we overwrote the description. If you said, hey, you wanted to update the description, it would disregard the user description and put in a new description. Now we actually keep it. So if you type in a description like this, because this is to get to, you can look at the ask in there, that connection to the GitHub. I always get it wrong. Tasks or whatever it is, checks or whatever. So that stays there so that you can see what you typed in. We never overwrite it.
Yeah, we will never overwrite that.
Well,
we want to maintain the user's initial description.
Yeah.
So then what we do is we go past this, we take a look at that. There's been 7 commits to this point. So what we do is we actually provide an up-to-date description and breakdown of everything that has happened in this PR. And if you went ahead and submitted another commit, this gets updated to reflect that. And then peeling back the next layer of the onion, we get down to the changes walkthrough. As a code reviewer, at this point, you're now familiar with kind of what this PR is about. Now you actually want to start reviewing it. So what we do is we give you a file by file breakdown. I can go ahead and rather than just drilling into the changes immediately, I can actually expand this out and it gives me bullet points. So let's see, we removed some redundant code, we added a new function, we replaced some direct API calls. Great. I now know what it is I'm about to look at. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this and take me to the code changes and actually be able to review those with that context in mind. So this helps me, again, to navigate this. This can be particularly important when you've got large PRs, which can happen for a wide variety of reasons, whether it's brand new functionality or whether it's like a large refactoring or whatever it is. This can be a godsend in a lot of cases trying to get through that. However, probably where we start to get into the meat of what we do is really found in the PR Reviewer Guide. This is when we start to provide some more interesting analyses. So the first part about this, we have something that we recently introduced called ticket compliance analysis. We kind of referred to this a little bit earlier. So if you're using like a ticketing system, a lot of us, for example, are using Jira. It's pretty ubiquitous. And so when we talk about like Jira, This person, they included a reference to the Jira ticket here. It could have been a link. It could have been just like the final slug qmerge dash 4. It could be whatever. We would actually use the Jira integration to look up that Jira ticket. We would understand what are the requirements of that Jira ticket, and then we would compare that with the code changes to see like what is this lining up. And if there's anything that doesn't line up, we would actually point out any sort of non-compliant requirements that weren't satisfied by the PR. This is really great because, like, as a PR reviewer or as the PR author, this allows you to kind of really quickly and easily get a grasp of this without having to go through all of those sorts of details manually by yourself.
Can I add one thing
Yeah, go for it.
about this? Is how we always take the approach of, we'll try to make it as easy for you as possible. But if you don't do that, you can actually have the link. And that's what that link in the top for is. But if your branch follows the convention for like Jira or for the actual issues and stuff, it'll actually know, oh, you made this the base URL, you put that in your configuration. So every time you do a PR, you don't have to copy, hey, this is the ticket I was working on. It'll automatically go search for it. It says, oh, I'm supposed to go look for a ticket. Oh, your branch, oh, there's a ticket with that branch ID. Boom, it matches together. Just FYI. So it's really, a nice convenience if so. But if not, you put your link to it up at the top in the user description, hence why it stays there and it'll keep connected.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think the other couple of things I would just highlight here, and then we'll pause for any lingering questions. So be thinking about your questions if you have any remaining ones. We're down to the last 5-ish minutes or so. Um, is that we'll also point out here if there's any sort of security concerns. We'll point out if there's any recommended areas for focus and review, which usually there is. I've actually find this fascinating. There's a wide diversity range of things that can show up in here. In this case, we're seeing a possible bug. We're also seeing a code smell where there's actually a function that we're indicating has a high level of complexity nested logic, and we're saying consider refactoring to improve readability and maintainability. Now, what's really cool about this, some of you particularly, because we know it's funny. Everybody wants a code review, but doesn't want to give one, right? That isn't that the classic scenario. But like as part of this, uh, if you happen to be in the code reviewer seat, what's really cool is this comment, as I mentioned, will get posted within 30 to 60 seconds of the PR being generated. And what will happen then is a lot of times the PR author is going to see this. They're going to go, oh crap, there's a possible bug. Oh crap, there's a code smell. And they're probably going to start working on that, maybe even deal with it before you get involved. This can actually help to expedite code review processes by allowing this person to be able to kind of take a look at these things and review them and fix them before a code reviewer has to point those same things out. The
Hey,
other
can I
thing,
add to that?
yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in. And this is the whole point of, as you guys probably already know, and someone did this, Harut, I actually asked this, shouldn't this happen in the CI part, in the integration? And as a developer, you run those tools on your laptop before you're going to check in, because you don't want to have a PR and have, oh, my unit tests are broken. Oh, can you review? Now you're wasting developers' times because the developer's coming in. Well, you might say, hey, well, this is wasting developer time because shouldn't I have been able to been notified for this possible bug and code smell before? And that's where Jonathan's probably going to open up his IDE and show that we do have a state for that. Oh, you just lost your desktop if you're going to try to do that. That the whole thing for this is that we have a state. So it's kind of a little hidden thing, but you click on there and you say get diff. We don't call it Qodo merge or whatever, but he could click on the local changes or your stage change, and that actually is connecting and doing the same kind of commands. So you could say the improve, or I think it's improve command that one's tied to.
Actually, what you can do here is, there's two parts. There's one is selecting the context. So rather than just selecting the current state of the file, you can actually select the diff, which is basically what Codo merge is doing. It's looking at the diff of the code changes.
Chunk.
And so we can do that here. And then the second part is you'll notice actually when you hit the slash command, there's actually some new commands that were not available previously. This includes, by the way, the slash review. This is going to be basically very similar to what we were just looking at inside of GitHub, that comment that said like review, kind of those like the code reviewer, PR reviewer guide. This is going to be effectively the IDE version of that. Additionally, you can use this to create commit messages, create change logs, other things like that. So anyway, the idea, I just wanted to show that to you guys that yes, you can shift left. Yes, if you are afraid about our tool airing your dirty laundry in front of everybody when a PR is created, you can actually capture those things at the IDE level using using our tool. The last thing I would note, which kind of again attaches both tools together because we are building a platform, is this idea of a best practices. Um, if you include a best practices markdown file inside of your repo, right in the root of your repo, both of our products use that best practices file. In fact, if I take a look at an example of this, let me go ahead and like close out. Let's go ahead and open this up. That's
Oh,
not
it's in
opening for some.
review.
There we go. We'll close out some of these panels so we have some breathing room. You'll see that it's basically just like a human readable markdown file. It's nothing fancy. You're not doing coding language or prompting or anything. It's just a human readable best practices. And this could be really anything you can think of that would be your best practices. Not only would this be used to actually generate code for you that meets your standards and your policies and your practices, but also when you get to Qodo merge and we're posting those comments on your PR to say like, here's some things that could be better, we would also use these best practices and policies and whatnot that you've laid out to point out areas where you're not meeting your organizational best practices as the part of the code review. So just kind of sharing that with you, this is really kind of a phenomenal thing that can be. I was talking to someone recently and they're like, hey, when we generate documentation, we want everybody to actually follow a certain template for how that documentation is structured. Great. Include it in your best practices markdown file, right? Or a wide variety of other things. And so anyway, just kind of sharing that with you guys as the final point. And then we'll just pause and see if there's
And
any other questions.
And Jonathan, I just wanted to tie back in that loop in the CI because obviously the CI is like, hey, you don't even start the merge unless the continuous integration has actually passed. So if you look at this, we're not embedded into your build tool for your CI/CD pipeline. We don't get kicked off in that CI/CD pipeline. What's happening is this is like your first reviewer. So again, you would say, like Jonathan was alluding to, and I think this is why he asked that question was, yeah, you really want the author because I'm in charge of it. It's my code and everything else. So all these suggestions, everything should not be a reviewer and they should be addressed. You guys should have some kind of contract with each other of saying, look, we're going, and you can fine tune this too. Remember, you can do like different levels and different categories and say 9 and above, only show 9 and above. And you should say, hey, okay, I will fix all the 9s and above. Well, you don't want to have the tool to be telling you that on the merge request because you don't want, if I'm a reviewer, I don't want to be notified to go review when it's not done yet because you're wasting my time. I had a context switch and everything else. That's why we have it in the actual tool. Yes, we're not in the CI/CD pipeline, that CI, but we're actually in the tool where the best work can be done anyway because you're the developer. You should fix those problems before you submit it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense to everyone.
So I think in conclusion there, what I'll say is this, that while out of the box, the functionality works great, satisfies most people, what David's alluding to is there's a lot of configurability available. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of, there's a configuration file for even Qodo merge that you can use to kind of like indicate what things you do and don't want to see and turn certain features on and off. There's a lot that can be done there. And so so for even the most picky of organizations who they want things to be a very specific way, we can do that. And so anyway, we're going to end off there today. I don't know what we're going to do in future webinars when we have even more products. We might have to do separate webinars for different products, but because we're already kind of time constrained as it is. But anyway, I'm thankful for all the participation today. You guys have been wonderful. If there's anything that we haven't covered today that you were hoping we would, reach out to our company. We're happy to be able to help you out. Thank you, everyone.